All right, strap in, everyone, because today we are going deep on, well, this should be interesting, Gary Brodsky
Oh, yeah.
and his, we'll just say, unique take on dating and relationships.
Unique is one word for it.
We've got some excerpts from his Extreme Domination MP3
Okay.
and his PDF, How to Dominate Women. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. And let me tell you, this guy, he doesn't hold back.
He really doesn't.
No, he does not.
Just in the titles alone, you get a sense of where he's coming from.
Absolutely.
Brodsky, he lays out his worldview pretty clearly.
Yeah.
And the foundation of it is this idea that men are losing the battle of the sexes because they've become too nice, too accommodating.
So he's saying chivalry is dead and good riddance.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
He thinks men have just made women's lives too easy.
Okay.
And that, in his view, that has just led to a lack of appreciation from women and an increase in their demands.
Okay.
He uses this analogy of men showering women with all these like modern conveniences, you know, washing machines and all these things that make life easier, only to have women act like, and this is his words, spoiled cats who just want more and more.
Okay. So far, not exactly winning any feminist awards.
No, not really.
But how does he get to this domination concept?
Well, that's really the core of his argument.
Okay.
Brodsky actually thinks that being the nice guy
Right.
is completely backfiring.
Okay.
He thinks that women are, get this, actually craving a return to these traditional roles where men are the dominant force.
Dominant, like Neanderthal dragging his mate by the hair?
Well, I mean, he does use some pretty colorful language. He actually says that men shouldn't have stopped knocking them down and dragging them back to the cave of our choice.
I was going to say, I bet he does.
Yeah. Which, as you can imagine, has raised a few eyebrows.
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
So is he really saying that men should act like cavemen to attract women in the 21st century?
I don't think it's that literal. I think what he's trying to get at, in his own, you know, kind of abrasive way, is that women are attracted to strength and assertiveness.
Right.
He thinks modern men have just lost touch with those qualities and have become too passive in their relationships.
So instead of asking a woman what she wants for dinner, he's saying, like, just pick a place and tell her to be ready by 7.
He might actually say something like that, yeah.
Wow.
He is a big believer in men taking charge, making decisions, and setting really clear boundaries.
Okay.
He says that women find this type of, like, decisiveness attractive because it conveys confidence and masculinity.
Okay, but there's a fine line between, like, assertive and just being a controlling jerk.
Yeah.
Where does Brodsky draw that line?
That's a great question, and it's where his advice gets a little, well, a little murky.
Okay.
He definitely encourages men to be just firm and unwavering in their decisions, even if it means, like, going against what a woman wants. He even says that men should never apologize for a woman's emotional outbursts and should instead just withdraw until she calms down.
Really? So no grand romantic gestures, no heartfelt apologies?
Not in Brodsky's playbook, no.
Wow.
He sees those kinds of gestures as signs of weakness.
Okay.
He actually tells men to just never give in to a woman's attempts to, like, change them, even if it's something small.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, well, he uses the example of a woman asking her partner to straighten his tie.
Right.
Brodsky says the man should just flat out refuse and tell her to do it herself.
Really?
Yeah. He sees any attempt by a woman to influence a man's behavior, even in just minor ways, as a challenge to his authority.
Wow. Okay, so he's clearly got some very strong opinions about how men should behave in relationships.
Definitely.
But before we unpack all that, how does he think men should actually approach women in the first place?
Right.
Is it all just like flexing your muscles and grunting?
Thankfully, no. He does talk about the importance of confidence, but he frames it as like this genuine self-assurance that comes from within, not just some superficial act.
So it's more than just peacocking around trying to, like, impress women.
Right. He actually warns against, like, trying to be someone you're not.
Oh.
He says that women can, like, spot a fake a mile away, and that authenticity is far more attractive than any pickup artist routine.
Okay, I mean, that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does that square with his whole dominance philosophy?
Right.
It seems like those two things might be at odds.
It's a good observation. I think the way Brodsky sees it, confidence and dominance kind of go hand in hand. He believes that a truly confident man is comfortable taking charge and leading the way, which in turn makes him more attractive to women.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot between being assertive but also being genuine.
That's what he seems to be suggesting. Although his definition of assertive might be a bit extreme for some people.
Yeah, I could see that already.
Yeah.
Well, we've definitely uncovered some, let's say, interesting and maybe controversial ideas so far.
Yeah.
But let's get into the specifics.
Okay.
Brodsky outlines this whole arsenal of tactics and strategies
Right.
for attracting, or as he says, dominating women.
Mm-hmm.
So let's unpack some of those, and let's start with compliments.
Okay.
He's a big fan of flattery.
He is, and his reasoning is kind of interesting.
Okay.
He believes that women are compliment junkies,
Oh, wow.
craving validation and affirmation constantly.
Mhm.
He even goes as far as to say that women will like overlook any insincerity or exaggeration as
Right.
long as those compliments just keep coming.
So lay it on thick, even if you don't really mean it.
He doesn't explicitly advocate for dishonesty,
Okay.
but he does suggest that men shouldn't be afraid to like exaggerate their compliments
Right.
to appeal to a woman's ego.
But wouldn't that, like, eventually backfire?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But Brodsky seems to think that women are so starved for compliments that they'll just accept any praise they can get, regardless of if it's authentic or not.
Okay.
He even uses this rather amusing example
Okay.
of an 86-year-old aunt who enjoys being called the sexiest thing in the room,
Oh, my God.
suggesting that women will just overlook absurdity for a bigger piece of that compliment cake.
Okay, that's a pretty bold claim. Not sure I'm buying that, but okay,
Okay.
let's move on.
Okay.
What about humor? He talks about that a lot too, right?
He does, yeah.
Okay.
He sees humor as this powerful tool to disarm women, lower their defenses,
Oh.
and even create these opportunities for physical contact.
So make her laugh and she's yours.
It's not that simple,
Yeah.
but he does believe that laughter can create that sense of like connection and intimacy
Right.
that can work in a man's favor.
But isn't he kind of contradicting himself?
Yeah,
Like earlier he said women don't appreciate nice guys.
right.
And now he's saying make him laugh.
It's definitely a mixed message.
Yeah.
I think what he's trying to say is that humor should be used strategically
Okay.
as a way to kind of charm a woman and lower her guard, not as a way to be a people pleaser. Like, not just being funny to please her, but funny to,
Right.
to get her to kind of,
To disarm her.
yes, disarm her.
Okay.
Exactly.
So playful and witty, not just cracking corny jokes to get a chuckle.
Right. He even says that women can tell when a man is trying too hard to be funny,
Yeah.
and it just comes across as desperate.
Sure.
He thinks that true humor comes from confidence and just a genuine enjoyment of life.
Okay. That makes a little more sense, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm still getting this vibe that, like, Brodsky sees women as these, like, puzzles to be solved.
I get that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than individuals with, like, their own thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, that's a really good observation and something we'll definitely want to keep in mind as we go forward and look at more of his advice. It's important to remember every woman is different.
Right.
And what works for one might not work for another.
And, I mean, just generally
Yeah.
treating someone with respect and genuine interest is probably going to be more effective than
No.
any manipulative tactic. Right.
Absolutely. But Brodsky seems to have a very different view of how relationships work.
Okay.
He sees them as these power struggles where men need to constantly assert their dominance
Right.
to keep a woman interested.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that's where his power moves come in.
Exactly.
All of these calculated strategies designed to, like, keep women off balance and under his control.
Yes.
So we'll get into those in the next segment. But first,
Okay.
I do want to touch on Brodsky's view of women in general,
Okay.
because he doesn't exactly paint them in the most flattering light.
He does not.
No, he does not.
His writing is full of generalizations and stereotypes about women,
Yeah.
portraying them as like irrational, manipulative, and inherently untrustworthy.
Yeah, he even compares women to the most vicious of jungle beasts,
Oh, wow.
warning men that any sign of weakness will be met with swift and merciless attack.
It's a very cynical perspective,
Yeah.
and it's important to remember this is just one man's opinion,
Right.
not necessarily a reflection of reality.
Right. It's important to be critical of these kinds of sweeping statements
Yes.
and recognize that there's just as much diversity and complexity among women as there is among men.
Exactly.
Right.
And we'll be unpacking some of those stereotypes and generalizations
Yeah.
as we continue exploring Brodsky's advice.
Well, this has been a pretty wild ride so far.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to unpack.
There is.
So in our next segment, we'll delve deeper into Brodsky's power moves
All right.
and explore his advice on, like, everything from handling rejection
Oh,
to maintaining this, like, dominance in a long-term relationship.
fascinating.
It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's a little unsettling, so stay tuned. All right, see you in the next one.
So, ready to dive into some of these so-called power moves?
Yeah, let's do it. But before we get into, like, the specifics of all that, I am curious about something.
Okay.
Brodsky spends all this time talking about how men should never do favors for women.
Right.
But then he also talks about the importance of being thoughtful and generous,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to, like, gift giving.
Yeah, that's true.
So how do those two things reconcile?
It does seem kind of contradictory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think the key here is understanding Brodsky's belief
Okay.
that any act of kindness or generosity from a man should be strategic, never selfless.
Strategic meaning it should always have some kind of ulterior motive.
Exactly. He's not advocating for genuine kindness.
Wow.
He's saying that men should use these gestures to their advantage as a way to, like, manipulate a woman's perception of him and ultimately increase his control over her.
So even if a guy is genuinely trying to be nice, Brodsky would say he's doing it wrong.
Pretty much. Wow.
He thinks that men should always have an agenda, even when it comes to something as simple as giving a gift.
So what's his advice on gifts then? What does he consider a strategic gift?
He suggests giving gifts that evoke a specific memory or feeling,
Okay.
even if it's a memory that the woman herself doesn't recall.
Really?
Yeah, he thinks that this creates, like, a sense of intimacy
Okay.
and reinforces his attentiveness in her mind.
So it's not about the gift itself, it's about the story behind it.
Exactly. It's about creating a narrative that positions him as, you know, the thoughtful romantic hero.
Wow.
And he even goes as far as to say that a little jealousy from her friends can work in his favor.
Jealousy? How so?
He thinks that if a woman's friends are envious of the gifts she receives, it will make her feel more, like, special and desirable.
Right.
And by extension, more attached to the man who gave her those gifts.
Wow, that's pre-calculated.
It is.
But what about the whole no favors thing? How does that fit into all of this? So he believes that doing favors for women just reinforces this dynamic where she's in control and he's subservient.
Right.
He argues that men should never do anything that might give a woman, like, leverage in the relationship.
So no helping her carry groceries, no fixing her leaky faucet.
He would definitely advise against that.
Really?
Yeah, he sees those kind of acts as undermining a man's authority and just giving the woman a sense of power over him.
That's pretty harsh. I mean, what if it's just like a simple act of kindness?
Right.
Like you genuinely want to help someone.
Brodsky would argue that you're deluding yourself.
Okay.
He thinks that women always have an ulterior motive.
Right.
And that men should be constantly on guard against being manipulated.
So if you follow Brodsky's advice, basically any interaction with a woman just becomes this, like, power struggle.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
He sees relationships as this constant battle for dominance, and he thinks that men need to be strategic and calculating in every interaction to come out on top.
But wouldn't that be exhausting?
It definitely sounds exhausting and not really conducive to a healthy, loving relationship.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So what about, like, communication and emotional intimacy?
Right.
Does Brodsky have any advice on those aspects of a relationship?
He does, but his advice is often, well, problematic, to say the least.
Right.
He believes that men should never express any vulnerability or neediness because he sees those as weaknesses that women will exploit.
So no sharing your feelings, no talking about your problems.
Not if you want to maintain your dominance, according to Brodsky.
Wow.
He encourages men to be stoic and emotionally detached.
Okay.
And just avoid any conversations that might, you know, give the woman the upper hand.
Oh, that seems like a recipe for disaster.
It does.
I mean, how can you build any kind of genuine connection with someone if you're constantly, like, holding back and refusing to be vulnerable?
You can't, and that's really where Brodsky's advice just falls apart.
Yeah.
He's so focused on winning the battle of the sexes that he misses the whole point of being in a relationship in the first place.
Right. It seems like his approach is much more about conquest than connection.
Exactly. He sees women as challenges to be overcome.
Right.
Not partners to be loved and cherished.
Okay. So we've definitely uncovered some pretty disturbing aspects of Brodsky's philosophy so far.
Yeah.
But let's try and, like, give him the benefit of the doubt for a second.
Okay.
Are there any parts of his advice that might actually be helpful or insightful?
There are a few nuggets, I think,
Yeah.
buried within all of his, often toxic rhetoric.
Right.
For example, he emphasizes the importance of taking care of yourself,
Okay.
both physically and mentally.
So like hitting the gym and eating healthy.
He does talk about physical fitness,
Okay.
but he frames it as more of a way to, increase your attractiveness and dominance,
Okay.
not for your well-being.
So still pretty self-serving.
Right.
Okay, what about mental health? Does he have any advice on that?
He doesn't really talk about mental health specifically. Okay.
But he does encourage men to be self-aware.
Right.
And to develop a strong sense of self-worth.
That's good advice.
It is, and it's something that we can all benefit from,
Yeah.
regardless of gender or relationship status.
Right.
So
So even though, Brodsky's overall philosophy is pretty messed up,
yeah,
there are still some takeaways that might be valuable if we, approach them with a critical eye.
exactly. It's important to remember we can learn something from any source,
Right.
even if we don't agree with everything being said.
Exactly.
The key is to be discerning and to filter out the harmful stuff.
Yeah, well said.
Okay.
Okay, so we've delved pretty deeply into Brodsky's views on, relationships.
Yeah.
But there's one more area we need to explore, and
Okay.
it's perhaps the most controversial of all.
All right.
His views on American women
Right.
and his suggestion that men should just, seek out foreign partners.
This is where his writing veers into some really dangerous territory.
It does. He basically argues that American women have been corrupted by feminist ideology and political correctness,
Yeah.
making them unfit partners for men who want traditional relationships.
He actually uses the term damaged to describe American women,
Oh, wow.
claiming that they've lost their femininity and their ability to respect and submit to male authority.
It's pretty offensive.
Yeah, it's some pretty offensive stuff.
It is, and it's important to remember, again, that this is just one man's opinion,
Right.
not a reflection of reality.
Right.
There are plenty of strong, independent, and successful women in America
Of course.
who are perfectly capable of being loving and supportive partners.
And reducing an entire group of people to a stereotype is not only inaccurate,
Yeah,
but it's also incredibly harmful.
it is.
It perpetuates prejudice and discrimination
Right.
and just contributes to a culture of misogyny.
Absolutely. It's important to challenge those kinds of generalizations
Yeah.
and to recognize that women, just like men, are individuals with their own thoughts and feelings and
Wow.
experiences.
So what's Brodsky's alternative then? What does he suggest men do if they can't find a suitable partner in America?
He recommends seeking out women from other cultures,
Okay.
particularly those with what he calls traditional values.
Traditional values meaning women who are submissive and subservient to men.
That's pretty much what he's implying.
Wow.
He thinks that women from certain cultures are more likely to respect male authority and accept a more traditional role in the relationship.
But isn't that incredibly ethnocentric
Yeah,
and potentially exploitative?
absolutely.
It sounds like he's just looking for a woman who will fit into his preconceived notion of
Yeah.
what a wife should be
Yeah.
without any regard for her individual desires or aspirations.
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that, generalizing about entire cultures is
Yep.
just as dangerous as generalizing about entire genders.
So while Brodsky might present this as a solution for men who are struggling to find love in America,
Right.
it's actually a very, problematic and potentially harmful suggestion.
Absolutely. It's essential to approach relationships with respect,
Yeah.
empathy, and a genuine desire to, connect with another human being,
Exactly.
not just to find someone who fits into your mold.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a pretty intense exploration of Brodsky's worldview,
It has.
and we've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
but we're not done yet.
No.
In our final segment, we'll unpack some of his more specific tactics and strategies,
Right.
including his infamous jerk-off test
Oh, boy.
and his advice on handling rejection.
That should be interesting.
It's going to be fascinating
Yeah.
and perhaps a little disturbing, so stay tuned.
Okay.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig into some of the more,
Colorful
colorful aspects of Brodsky's, we'll call it a playbook.
playbook. Yeah.
He certainly doesn't shy away from controversy.
Not at all, especially when it comes to those power moves.
Speaking of which, let's talk about one that's been raising some eyebrows.
Okay.
This whole thing about taking women to dangerous neighborhoods.
Right.
He's serious?
He is. Yeah.
Wow.
And his reasoning is pretty interesting. He believes that the adrenaline rush a woman experiences in a potentially dangerous environment
Okay.
will translate into sexual attraction towards him.
So he's basically saying, Take her somewhere scary, and she'll jump into your arms for protection.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Wow.
He even compares it to, like, taking a woman to an amusement park,
Yeah.
saying the adrenaline rush is the same.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I think there's a pretty big difference between, like, the controlled thrills of a roller coaster
Right.
and the genuine fear of being in a dangerous situation.
Exactly. And it's incredibly presumptuous to assume that a woman is going to respond positively to
Right.
that kind of fear-inducing tactic.
Yeah.
It could very easily backfire, make her feel unsafe.
Yeah, of course.
And distrustful.
It seems like he's just completely overlooking, like, the importance of consent and respect in these situations.
He is, and it's a dangerous oversight.
Yeah.
You know, creating a situation where a woman feels threatened or vulnerable
Right.
is never okay.
Well, let's move on to something a little less intense.
Okay.
Brodsky also talks a lot about the importance of touch,
Yes.
specifically how men should gradually escalate physical contact
Right.
to basically desensitize a woman to his advances.
Right. He suggests starting with, like, seemingly innocent gestures,
Okay.
like holding hands or brief massages,
Right.
gradually increasing the intensity and intimacy of the touch over time.
He even advises men to kiss a woman's hand
Yeah.
or her fingers on the first encounter,
Right.
rather than going for the traditional, like, lip kiss.
Yeah, he thinks that this approach creates a sense of mystery and anticipation,
Okay.
making the woman, in his words, more eager for his attention.
But again, it all comes back to consent.
Yes.
What might seem like a playful gesture to one person
Right.
could feel intrusive or disrespectful to another.
Absolutely. It's so important to pay attention to a woman's body language
Right.
and verbal cues and to respect her boundaries.
Of course.
If she seems uncomfortable or pulls away,
Right.
it's important to back off
Yeah.
and respect her space.
Okay, well, let's move on to something that's been generating a lot of buzz.
Okay.
This infamous jerk-off test.
Oh boy, here we go.
What is this exactly?
Okay.
And is it as crude as it sounds?
It is pretty crude, yeah.
Right.
Essentially, it's this mental exercise
Okay.
where a man visualizes a sexual encounter with a woman
Right.
to gauge his level of attraction.
So he's saying, like, if you can't picture yourself sleeping with her, don't waste your time.
Pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah, he thinks this visualization process.
I mean, I can see how that might be helpful in some cases, but it also seems incredibly dehumanizing
Yes.
to reduce a woman to a sexual object in this way.
It is. It really reinforces this idea that a woman's worth
Right.
is primarily determined by her sexual attractiveness.
And it's also worth noting that this whole test is based entirely on, like, a man's subjective perception,
Right.
which might not align with reality at all.
Exactly. A man might convince himself he's not attracted to a woman based on this visualization.
Right.
When in reality, he's just afraid of rejection.
Right. Or commitment.
Or commitment, exactly.
So while this jerk-off test might have, like, some superficial appeal,
yeah.
it's ultimately a pretty flawed,
Yeah.
potentially harmful way to approach dating.
Agreed. It's far more important to connect with someone on an emotional and intellectual level
Right.
and to build a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding.
Well, I think it's safe to say, after all of this, that Brodsky's views on dating and relationships are,
Yeah.
at best, controversial. Very controversial.
And at worst, deeply problematic.
His advice often relies on just these outdated gender stereotypes,
Right.
promotes manipulative tactics,
Yeah.
and ultimately undermines the foundation of healthy, respectful relationships.
But even though we've spent a lot of time, dissecting his flaws,
Yeah,
I think there's still value in trying to understand his perspective.
I agree.
It can help us recognize and challenge those harmful ideas when we encounter them out in the world.
Absolutely. And by understanding, like, the tactics that some people might use to manipulate others,
Right.
we can better protect ourselves
Yeah.
and advocate for healthy and equitable relationships.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Gary Brodsky,
Right.
we want to leave you with this. Genuine connection and intimacy
Yeah.
are built on trust, respect, and vulnerability, not manipulation and control.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And remember, healthy relationships are a two-way street
Yes.
where both partners feel valued and respected
Absolutely.
and empowered to be their authentic selves. Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the often baffling world of Gary Brodsky.
Of course, my pleasure.
We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought
It certainly has for me.
and perhaps even inspired you to challenge some of those harmful ideas that still persist in our society.
Very important.
Until next time, Keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Right.
And remember, there's always more to learn.
Always. It's